Hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar on getting your thought leadership right from Kelso Consulting. So first of all, just quickly on timings, we'll be spending an hour on this, so we'll have to move at quite a pace. Using the question box, please could you send questions as we go along, as I will try to tackle them at the right point, although we certainly will be taking further questions at the end. Just to let you know, afterwards we'll be sending you a link to a recording to this, unless of course you're already listening to the recording, as we're going to be recording it and sending it out to people. We will also be sending you emails with additional useful links and material afterwards, and straight afterwards we'll be sending you a questionnaire. It'll only take a minute to fill in, and I'd be really grateful if you could fill this in and give us your feedback. Now to introduce first of all, before I introduce myself, just to let you know what we will be covering. We will be starting with why businesses do thought leadership. We'll be talking about how you get a program started, particularly spending time on getting the thought leadership right, maximising the impact and measuring your ROI. As we are a public relations agency, and a damn good one, we'll be talking about getting the PR right. We'll be wrapping up with a few tips on preventing thought leadership fails, and of course we'll be tackling your questions. It means we're covering quite a wide area, so do use the questions to allow us to drill into any areas a bit more detail. To introduce myself, my name is Tim Priceman. I'm a director with Kelso Consulting. I've been advising firms on thought leadership and helping them do fabulous campaigns since before the term was widely used, and indeed I've written the book on it, the Thought Leadership Manual, which is the available all good bookshops, available on Amazon. If you don't like big American giant firms, it's also available online on Wordery, and makes an ideal present for colleagues and loved ones. And in it we go through all the areas we're covering in this, and indeed other areas as well, in a lot more detail. My LinkedIn is down there, by the way. Do feel free to connect with me afterwards. Kelso Consulting, we've got some clients and other people who know the firm well on the webinar. We've also got people who are new to us. So we're reputation builders. We build powerful reputations for our clients, who are typically technology, consultancy, professional, financial businesses. We do all sorts of services you would expect a PR agency to do. Perhaps we also do some you wouldn't expect around speaking events, awards for law firms, things like legal directory entries. And a particular area of specialism for us is all aspects of creating, delivering successful thought leadership campaigns, and we work with businesses who are doing their first campaigns, and we work with businesses who've been doing them a long time, have established programs, and for whatever reason are looking for us to help bring extra impact to them. But what is thought leadership? It's an awful buzzword, and we've been using it lots of times already, perhaps inevitably on a seminar about it. Well, the key thing is that it's all about insights, it's all about relevance, and it's all about credibility. Ultimately, it has thought as 50% of the term, so thought is very important. It could be insights from research, it could be thought-provoking white papers, articles, videos, it could be some interesting findings from analysing data and trends, It could be observations, but I think they need to be backed up by evidence and credibility. It can be campaigning for change, and it could be using things like freedom of information requests to unveil interesting insights, campaign for change. It could simply be having a landmark event. Oh, I've got one question here which says, will a slide summary be available? Well, we'll certainly be letting people have the video and podcast. If people would like the slides as well, let us know and we can send them through. I think it's important to also think about what thought leadership isn't, particularly not just exclusively with American firms, but particularly with American firms. There's a tendency for any old thing to be labelled thought leadership. If you're simply just going to relabel your existing marketing and press activity thought leadership, well, you've certainly ticked the box of having a thought leadership program, but you're only fooling yourselves. So any old press release, newsletter isn't thought leadership. It depends what's in it, quite frankly. There's lots of low quality cut and paste clickbait articles that are produced for search engine optimization or to hit a quota for a weekly blog. Let's be honest, these aren't thought leadership. I'm not saying you shouldn't be doing these sorts of things, but don't kid yourself, they're thought leadership. They're clickbait articles or maybe day-to-day comment or whatever it is, but they're not thought leadership. Clearly technical output that people don't understand, other than a few aficionados, doesn't count. Brochures, sales pitches, all of these sorts of things. That's not to say you shouldn't do them, but they're not thought leadership. There is, quite frankly, a tendency to for people to want to not say anything interesting, avoid expressing an opinion. Let's be clear, this is thought followership. If you're somewhere in the pack saying the same thing as everybody else, you're following, not leading. A lot of people do surveys, they do publish lots of data, and they think that's thought leadership, and they wonder why they don't get any coverage or interest in it. And the reality is, it's because it's data. This is one of the areas we'll explore a bit more, but data without insights, data without a strong so what being expressed by you is simply data. It's not leadership. What is it? Well, actually, it's all around us once you start looking for it. Perhaps one of the granddaddies of it all is the McKinsey Quarterly, where I think it's now coming up for 40, maybe 50 years ago, McKinsey decided, in fact, I think it's longer than, I think it's 60 years ago it's coming up for, decided to, a small consultancy in New York decided to publish its best thoughts quarterly for the interest of people, indeed to demonstrate that it was having such excellent thoughts. The rest is history. Clearly they are now the world's leading strategy consultancy and one of the best known brands in the professions. Things like the CBI Business Confidence Index and the Purchasing Managers Index. Probably about 70 years ago, someone in the CBI thought, why don't we do a monthly survey and publish the findings? Nowadays, it influences interest rates, government policy, and the stock market. Everything around global warming and climate change has elements of thought leadership to it, as first of all the issue was thrust upon us, and now different aspects of it are debated, its impact highlighted, views on it are challenged and codified and proven. So climate change, you could even say that the fairly recent prominence to mental health brought about by Prince Harry and his statements on it set a whole change of attitudes in flow from that. And indeed we'll have next week, this is World Mental Health Day, where again, if you look out for it, people will no doubt be doing all sorts of things around there to establish themselves as insightful leaders in this area. So why do businesses do it? And clearly you don't have to be big prominent figures like a Royal to do it. You don't have to be a giant strategy consultancy like McKinsey, although when McKinsey started it, it was a small business. Well, particularly when you are a business that's all about expertise, whether that expertise comes through your consultants or it's embedded in your software, memorable marketing needs having something interesting to say. That's particularly relevant at the moment because of the internet and various things which we'll come on to, but it's always been that way. Back in 1993, David Maister, a thought leader and guru in his own right, produced the seminal book, which is still highly relevant today. It was about law firms, but it applies across the professions as well. Managing the Professional Services Firm. He notably says, marketing works when it demonstrates, not when it asserts. It's taken a lot of the world a long while to catch up with this. Marketing tactics that illustrate one's competence, such as speeches, seminars and article, are infinitely more powerful than those that assert it. And of course, what demonstrates your expertise more than demonstrating your expertise rather than asserting it? It's also very powerful thought leadership for overcoming the senior sales catch-22 problem. What is the senior sales catch-22? Well, the people you want to sell to, people in the C-suite, business owners, whoever, HR directors, all of these sorts of people do not want to have sales meetings except when they are in buying mode. But here's the problem. By the time they enter buying mode, they've typically decided, or at least have a very good idea, who they want to use. And so the door is still shut. You might be invited in to make up numbers, but you're very much, unless you've already got yourself in the favoured position, you are already at a disadvantage. Thought leadership overcomes this by allowing people to engage with senior people, and senior people very much want to engage with suppliers who can provide them something interesting, but they don't want to engage around in a sales conversation. They want insights and things that are going to help them see over the horizon, not just tackle current problems in front of them, prepare and be aware of future problems. And there's plenty of research about how effective this sort of strategy is in terms of developing the relationships, getting the meetings to pre-position yourself. And there's links there, there's some of it highlighted there for you to read later on, but we're going to move at a pace given what we need to cover. I would like to mention one example, and this is a Kelso client example, to illustrate that you don't need to be a big firm for all of this. Our client was a SaaS, in fact the term SaaS wasn't even around at the moment. They would have been called an application service provider at the time, called GlobalExpense. It was a 3-person startup and went on to become the leader in this sector. Indeed, it created the sector. Nowadays, it's a bit of a no-brainer. You'd probably outsource your expenses management, or at least aspects of it, or you'd use software for it, at least for many, many businesses. In those days, it was unheard of. So what were the lessons from this, and what effectively happened? This business went from 3 people to the industry leader with about 90, 100 people. It won lots of blue chip assignments from all sorts of people, from British Airways and, I don't know, Renault and all sorts of Sainsbury's and all sorts of people. And it was up against a large American competitor, which come in from the software angle to it. But it was able to beat its large American competitor at every large pitch. In fact, it was so successful that the American competitor gave up. It was called Concur, and it bought it. Concur itself has now been bought and is part of SAP, and indeed the global expense offering is still embedded in there somewhere. How was it able to do that? Well, there was a number of elements right from the start. It took the view, if you want to be seen as the market leader, you act like the market leader. Indeed, that was our advice to it right from the start. And part of that was indeed being a commentator on expenses issues. But secondly, as we highlighted, they were able to use the data within their system. It was a key asset. They were able to use that data to create an annual benchmarking report. So they were the publisher of the definitive and the only guide on employee expenses. But also we were able to combine that with survey data as well to come up with interesting aspects as well. They were able to use those interesting aspects, well, with our assistance, to get prominent press coverage. Indeed, they're on the front page of Financial Times, various things like this, trade publications, the Times, Telegraph, all of those sorts of things. But it also meant that at meetings, they were able to use these insights to not just say, our service will save you money and look at all the wonderful features on the drop down. It was able to get off that and start talking about the financial benefits from having expenses managed professionally, properly, but it was also able to highlight the downsides. For instance, what were the consequences of not doing it properly, things like expenses fraud, things like that, which suddenly would engage people like the HR people and the finance people, and suddenly it started to not be a simple technical purchase around what's on the drop downs and will it fit in there. It was all about things like reducing expenditure on expenses, cutting out expenses, fraud, things like that. And so they were able to get off the subject of technology, whereas in fact their technology was a little bit creaky compared to their competitor, and they'd have lost on that and get on to business issues, engaged other stakeholders, given them a strong so what, given them a challenger sale, and able to win the deal. So the elements from that are, first of all, the importance of thought leadership, not just for generating a reputation, generating press coverage or whatever, but also the impact it can have when you start to leverage it in other aspects of your business, particularly the sales process, and start acting like a thought leader as rather than just a Me Too features seller like your competitors. So, thought leadership program. How do you get one started? Or indeed, if you have one, how do you make it more relevant? Well, the key thing is to align it to strategy. If it's strongly aligned to your business's strategy, then there's a strong so what to it. If push comes to shove over resources, time and things like that, the stronger it's aligned to the strategy, the more fundamental it becomes. Secondly, you're going to need a senior level sponsor for it. How do you get a senior level sponsor? Well, that's all about aligning it to strategy. If it's on their agenda to hit a particular point in the strategy, then that's the so what, that's what's in it for them. And clearly you need to go about getting their buy-in to it. How do you get their buy-in to it? Well, first of all, you need to be demonstrating how a thought leadership program is going to help them meet their objectives with delivering on the strategy. Now, clearly that's all easier said than done, but part of it is all about being really clear at the start of what you're looking to achieve. And these expectations need to be realistic, but they need to be very specific. And a lot of programs get off to a very poor start by being vague. If you're vague, the problems start to build up to it. So an example of a vague program will be one that's going to get our name out there. The amount of times I hear things like get our name out there, yeah, great, but that's not something that's very specific. It's certainly something you can't attach any metrics to. On the other hand, something very specific like get 30 meetings with C-suite people in our target market is something that's pretty realistic, pretty measurable, and it's certainly something that you can imagine a senior level sponsor, particularly someone who's got responsibility around sales, growth, that sort of thing, thinking, blooming hell, this is important, I need to make sure this program happens. Of course, the challenge then is to create a program that delivers it, which is of course what we'll be coming on to later on. One thing I strongly recommend though is that as part of kicking it off, or if you don't have it already, is that you define what thought leadership is for your firm. How does it differentiate from marketing? How does it differentiate from sales? What actually is it you're looking to achieve? I've put on a couple of definitions here. One is the one I use in my book, and lots of people have copied it. I'm very flattered by that, and they're very welcome to. But I'm also, it's worth flagging up one that is used by Clifford Chance, one of the world's top law firms, which indeed has its own thought leadership committee. I would say the Thought Leadership Committee's job isn't to produce thought leadership, it's to encourage and direct it, not to produce it. That's done by the partners and the practices. They see thought leadership as forward-looking, contains intellectual content, progresses the discussion on a given issue, shows a different angle to an existing theme or makes new connections, has a cross-border practice or sector element to it. So that's what they're looking for. It's worth noting that one of the world's largest law firms defines thought leadership in a way that doesn't contain the word law, doesn't contain the word legal in it. That is thought leadership for Clifford Chance, not talking about the law. And indeed, they would see having events where you get prominent people discussing things in a forward-looking intellectual way as much thought leadership as producing lots of reports, articles and blogs. So, be clear on what you're talking about. The next thing is starting to get subjects correct, getting the right sort of subjects. So for many of the people on this line, on this webinar, will be looking to use thought leadership to generate leads and sales and ultimately win more business. So let's focus on that for the time being. A big problem that I see frequently is that people say, we want to engage with the board, we want to engage with the C-suite, and we're going to start talking about day-to-day operational issues or technical issues, and we're going to try and educate them. Clearly, this is a disastrous policy and is never going to work, yet many people pursue it. The cybersecurity industry is a classic example where it's spent years and years trying to turn board members into technologists. It's been a dismal failure. None of them are interested in it, and shows a classic misunderstanding of what you need to do, which is start talking if you want to deal with the board, you need to deal with their priorities and deal with the language of the board, which is all around policies, resources, governance, strategy, rather than, in this case, dealing with the board and telling them it's all about servers, routers, firewalls, programming languages, updates, etc., etc. I'm not saying those things aren't really important, but the board isn't interested. The business owner isn't interested. You need to be talking, if you're targeting them, policies, strategy, governance, all of these sorts of issues. Similarly, if you're targeting people at middle management, lower management, there's no point talking about governance and strategy with them. They're focused on operations, delivery, tactics, procedures, execution. So think who it is you're targeting, think about subjects for them, not simply saying we want to talk to the board about whatever it is we want to talk about. To develop that a bit more, if you were to think about the buyer's journey, they start with a latent need or opportunity and ultimately make a buying decision. All the research, and indeed I think certainly my experience reflects this, that of my clients and maybe yourself as well, is that particularly thanks to the internet, more and more of the decision is made before they talk to a salespeople. Who's the salespeople? Well, in law firms, it's the partners. In accountancy firms, it's the partners. In consultancies, it's the consultancies. In PR firms, it's the account directors and business owners. So more and more of the decision is made before they speak to a salesperson. This is through people looking up not just details about your business, but much more prior to that, looking at potential solutions, how people have tackled it, different sorts of solutions, and it's only after people have done a lot of research, a lot of asking around, that they start to approach businesses for sales conversations. So most of the decision is made early on, yet most firms focus most of their marketing material at the top end or at the final end of it with very specific things, which is all well and good, but at that point people have already started to make their mind up. Indeed, they've already been engaging earlier with people who talk about strategies, solutions and problems, not people who talk about their specific product. So again, with thought leadership, it allows you to engage much earlier on in the buying process, what we were referring to as overcoming the catch-22 sales. Of course, it helps very much at the final end as well. Indeed, what we often come across now is that in big procurements, buyers are insisting that there's an element of thought leadership, that businesses undertake thought leadership. Indeed, often businesses aren't included if they aren't doing thought leadership in the final one. And this isn't just in consultancy areas. We've recently came across it in a big building consortium procurement as well, where thought leadership was part of the requirement. So, what are the right sorts of subjects to be talking about? Well, I'm going to say that whatever it is you're talking about, it needs to, wherever humanly possible, attach to a megatrend. What is a megatrend? Well, these are the sorts of big things that are causing the tectonic shifts in the world. So, for instance, on the technology side, megatrends would be things like AI, robotics, smart drugs, maybe nanotechnology, all of these sorts of things. Internet of Things was a mega trend. Well, that's sort of moved on now and is being superseded. But definitely AI and machine learning are the hot topics at the moment. These sorts of things throw up sorts of big sorts of challenges. Urbanisation, multipolar world, climate change, rent not own, generation rent, all of these sorts of things. And they throw up important developments, whether it's the connected car, autonomous vehicles, longer living and cures for dementia, extended lifespan, those sorts of things. Now, why, clearly there's other mega trends that will be relevant to your particular sector, but why is a mega trend so important? Well, if you lurch from topic to topic, which is perhaps the other contrast, what you find is you're constantly reinventing the wheel, reinventing your thought leadership, trying to build a reputation. The advantage with megatrends is that they're always there, and once you're associated with them, you own it, or you are certainly have your flag on it. So you are always able to keep coming back to it, and people always associate you with it. And also, as it develops, you're already on it and able to maintain your position. If you simply lurch from topic to topic, a bit of a rent quote sort of manner, then you are constantly, as I mentioned, reinventing the wheel. Indeed, the sorts of places that is best for your thought leadership is going for topics where you have a mega trend that intersects something that's specific to your, whether it's your target sector, your target profession, whoever it is, and has regular bursts of topicality. Because the problem with just going for a mega trend is there's nothing, it doesn't bring a topical relevance that brings a so what, whether it's to the media, to your clients, that sort of thing. So coming up with themes or attaching yourself to themes which are in that sweet spot in the middle means that first of all your thought leadership always has relevance, because megatrends give it that relevance, but it also has the topicality, that why should we be talking about it, why should we be considering it now, and of course you make it relevant to the people you're looking to sell to, you're looking to influence. Okay, now maximising the commercial impact. It's a classic case of if you fail to prepare, then you're going to fail. And what I often observe, and indeed I'm not the only person who's observed this, is that thought leadership campaigns come a cropper or just aren't very effective through too little preparation right from the start. People want to jump right into doing all the fun stuff around having the survey and getting it out there. They want to spend lots of time on the wonderful creatives around, the brochure design or the report design, and they don't think enough about what they're looking to do at the start and how are they going to squeeze value from it. In fact, what I would say before you start anything at all is have a clear plan of how you are going to squeeze value from it. If you don't know how you're going to get value from it, how do you know you are producing the right sort of thing? This is particularly important in terms of achieving a good return on investment. The amount of campaigns I come across where people have maybe a few days or even a few weeks of activity from something that they've put hundreds of hours of effort into. If it's going to be important to you, think of how you're going to get 6 or 9 months of value or a year's month of value for it. If you can't think about that, how are you going to get value from it? Often I come across thought leadership campaigns where people think, oh, well, we'll do the research and then decide what we're going to do with it. Absolutely not. Indeed, not for this webinar, but certainly something in my book, is the importance of knowing the hypothesis before you even start on the research. And that is a big problem for people. They do research and then they find the findings are flat, and it rather scuppers the whole campaign. This is avoided by knowing by having some strong hypotheses that you are setting out to prove with the research, so that when the research arrives, you know it's going to be saying something interesting. We'll come on to this a bit more later on. But if you're going to have an effective plan, you need to involve all the stakeholders, not just if you're, for instance, in a partnership, suddenly dumping something on the partners and telling them they've got to cancel all their chargeable hours and get on and push out the marketing. You'll have no buy-in to it. Also, I would, as an observation, say there are plenty of firms that spend more time on the post-mortem of why it went wrong and blaming people, particularly law firms, than in actually getting it right from the start. So, I think you've got the point from what I'm saying here, is the more time you invest, the more time people invest in having a clear plan and commitment to what they're going to do with it, the more impact you'll get from it, the more value you'll get to it, the more you are able to measure the ROI, and the more buy-in you are able to get from the start, because people can see what is going to happen with it. But how do you get the very most from your thought leadership? Well, thinking back to some of the examples I mentioned earlier, it's through repetition. Repetition, repetition, repetition. The McKinsey Quarterly, if it was called the McKinsey One-Off, McKinsey would not be the firm it was. If it was the McKinsey We'll Do It When We Feel Like It, again, they would not be the firm they are today. The CBI Business Confidence Index, if it was called the CBI, rather than the monthly index, it was the We Will Do It When We Feel Like It index, would not be the influential index it is today. Of course, the repetition isn't just around doing the same initiative annually, although that is very important. I often come across firms who have done really successful thought leadership ones, or maybe they weren't so successful, but they say, oh, that was hard work, we won't do it anymore. When really, they've done all the hard work, they've gone through the learning, now they should be redoing it. A bit like motor companies saying, oh, building that first car was hard work, we won't do it again. Whereas, of course, it's the repetition that allows you to make it smoother, better, and build iteratively. With the emails that come afterwards, I will send you the link to the Deloitte Football Club report that has allowed Deloitte to build an industry leading practice. Again, this started with 3 people within it, and now last I heard it had about 50 or 60 people in it. Deloitte are well recognised as the leaders in sports finances as a result of it. Again, the benchmark report, if they had done it and said, oh, that worked reasonably well, we won't do it again, then they wouldn't be where they are. Similarly, if you look at all the things they do, it's a massive annual initiative. They would have never been able to do all of that as 3 people. They didn't do all of that. They simply did a straightforward benchmark report looking at football club accounts, and each year they've grown it year by year in light of their experience, by getting better at it, by getting more successful, by learning as they've gone along. So now it's a hugely complicated initiative, but they didn't start with a complicated initiative. They started with a simple one and grew it up. So measuring the ROI, which is something a lot of people mentioned in the questionnaire. So I've talked about the problem with measuring ROI is people either have very vague objectives, or they only start to think about what their objectives were at the end of it, when they think, oh, that was a big budget, a lot of time, we'd better prove that it was worth doing. Be specific on what you're trying to achieve. Be specific and clear on what the value of this is going to be. What is the value to your firm of 30 meetings with chief executives where you would expect maybe 20% of them to convert into initial projects and then into retained clients? What would be the lifetime value of those clients generated? Did the campaign deliver those meetings? Did the campaign deliver those initial projects? If so, I would suggest that you can quite easily prove a huge value to a project by knowing the lifetime value of clients and being able to be clear on how it's generated leads to either generate those clients or upgrade existing clients to them. But know where you're starting. Again, a lot of people don't know where they're starting, so they can't measure the change, and be clear from the outset how you will measure this, and then you can identify the change that's been delivered and the further value that's come from it. Sounds clear, sounds easy in theory. I will accept that it's harder in practice, but that's why you want to be doing it from the start and having discussions rather than expecting that there's a magic ROI on thought leadership calculator out there. There isn't, but measuring ROI with a bit of thought and a bit of a deliberation that makes it specific to your campaign is very, very achievable. Now, a key element is preventing weak thought leadership. I've mentioned about the importance of spending time up front on it to produce a clear plan. Number 2 is having a clear strategic point of view in whatever you are looking to say. And I've mentioned already, a key to this is having a clear hypothesis from the start. That involves, it could be that you have brilliant people who will come up with them. I would suggest more likely you need some sort of facilitated creative session. Putting 4 accountants around the table and hoping they'll have a fabulous session isn't going to work. Professionals don't think in that sort of way. So you'll need someone who is good at facilitating those sorts of things. If you're able to do it, that's great. If you have someone in your team who's able to do it, that's great. If not, maybe your PR agency. Otherwise, get us involved. But you need a facilitator to bring that out at the start, not try and find it in the data and ideas at the end. You probably won't find it if you've not set out to do it. The third element, and this is a particular lesson from leaders in this area like Accenture and McKinsey and these sorts of people, is a tough peer review. And this is indeed what scientists do as a normal course of things. So what does a tough peer review look like? It looks like sending it to your colleagues. It may involve other people you know and trust, experts in the area, clearly not your competitors, or it might indeed involve a few clients. But what you want them to do is to answer specific questions about it that allow them to grade it either really good and insightful or not insightful or not leading. particularly around the questions will be perhaps specific to what to your research, but ultimately you don't want vague things coming back like it was nice. You want it benchmarked 1 to 5 or whatever, and if it's coming back a 3, you know what that means. You're going to have to go back to the drawing board, or at least improve things in light of their feedback. So first of all, you want your initial hypotheses to be peer reviewed. Are you looking into areas where people think it's genuinely going to interest people in that sector? Secondly, you want to get your findings and conclusions peer reviewed as well. Most firms are in such a rush that they don't build this in, and so they end up firing out findings and conclusions that, quite frankly, are a bit weak and unexciting, whereas if more time had been spent challenging, fine-tuning, and indeed weaning out the weak elements, then they would have done a much better job. And one of the things that all the research into thought leadership indicates is that it's quality, not quantity. Indeed, if your quality is variable, you will be judged on the whole by your worst thought leadership, and people won't read your best thought leadership because they've had their time wasted by poor quality material. And you need to build in time for rework in this, and the will to rework this as well. It's no good just getting peer review and thinking, oh damn, well they didn't quite appreciate what we're trying to achieve here, we'll set it out anyway as we're running out of time. No, you needed to have built that thing in, and indeed give people enough time that they can turn things around quickly if you're on a tight deadline. Right, getting the PR right, and as you'll can imagine, we're a PR agency, so we've got lots of things to say on that, but time is our enemy, so I'm just going to pull out a few things. The first thing is, big mistake most people make is they simply give it to the PR agency at the end and say something like, what do you think of this? And can you write a press release on it? Well, quite frankly, there's not very much the PR agency can do with it. If they feedback saying, well, actually, it's not very good, you need to do X, Y, and Z, clearly that goes down like a lead brick. So what you need is to get strategic PR input at the start, not just, oh, hope the PR agency will come up with a clever spin on it at the end. It's too late by that point. You need to be drawing out clear so whats and winners and losers. This is again the problem with data, lots of data, so what? And a typical example of this is where people do reports that compare findings from different countries. So they have Britain against America, France and Italy, and lo and behold, Britain's findings are different to America and Germany. Well, that's merely a starting point. What is the so what? Why should we care that findings in Germany are different and behaviours in Germany are different to the UK? What's the so what? Is it that Britain is behind? Is it Britain in advance? What does that sort of mean? What does that mean for important things like public policy or future of the industry or whatever it is? Don't just present lots of data. We need a really big so what. With PR, timing is of the essence. So for World Mental Health Day next week, you need to be doing stuff now. You need to have been doing stuff in the run-up to it. You need to be doing stuff on the day. You know what? If you do stuff a few days afterwards, people have probably moved on to that. The same with the implementation of regulations, the same with whatever it is. There are good times for coverage when journalists are writing about the subject, and if you are in there and have built up your reputation and your relationships, you're going to do well. If people are writing about whatever issue it is because it's important and topical, and you go to them and say, I know that everyone's interested in whatever issue it is because it's important and topical, but we want to tell you about something else. You know what, you're swimming against the tide, and on this you will always get more impact and go further if you're swimming with the tide rather than swimming against it, or indeed arriving once the tide's gone out. Going back to the theme of repetition, think about campaign, so a whole series of activity, not a one-off. People mistakenly think journalists are sitting at their desk waiting for their press release to arrive. This is not the way the world works. You need to be warming people up, you need to be building a relationship with them, and you need to be helping them when they want things rather than just turning up unannounced, expecting them to drop all the things they're doing because it suits your timing. In fact, you need to think of the media as you would a client. They have no mistake who has the power in their relationship. You want coverage, they control that. You need to dance to their tune, and you need to treat them like the client, because ultimately they have lots of people offering interesting stuff to them, and they can choose someone else, and they full know that they are buying your insights and your time and your availability and your quotes with the payoff, which is hugely valued to you, which is publicity. So don't get into the mistaken belief that somehow the power relationship lies with you. If you hold some interesting, amazing bit of dirt on a story that they're covering, maybe, but most of the time, in fact, all the time, really, the power is with the journalist. And you need to realise that in terms of not just expecting, because Friday afternoon is a convenient time for your campaign to kick off, that the media are going to feel the same way about it. Okay, I will jump over the next slide. You can look at it later on, or maybe ask questions about it. I want to just run through a few thought leadership fails as we are wrapping up ahead of question. What are the problems we often find? Well, number one is everyone thinks it's a great idea, then they dump it on the marketing manager on top of all their jobs. Clearly, that's not going to allow, given all the things involved in the project. Maybe if you've got wonderful insight you want to blog out, that's fine. But if it's going to be the sorts of campaigns where you want to do a number of elements, involve PR, involve design, involve web pages, involve sales calls, involve an event, dumping it on a busy marketing manager, they're going to struggle to get everything done in the time available. As I mentioned, decide what you're going to do after the research and what you're going to talk about. Classic failings that cause campaigns to fail. Trying to have a very limited plan for a few days or a few weeks rather than a few months. And you may find this surprising for me to say as a PR agent, but campaigns that revolve around getting lots of press coverage as the defining element for their success are, quite frankly, going to fail in most cases in the business world. The reality is press coverage certainly adds nitrous oxide to the impact of your campaign, but ultimately journalists are some of the world's most unreliable people. You might get coverage, you might get big coverage, you might get small coverage, you might have to struggle hard over several weeks or indeed months to get regularity of coverage. Either way, one day's coverage isn't going to knock your large rival off their post. press coverage should be seen as the icing on the cake, and you need a cake that delivers value come what may, rather than one that revolves around the vagaries of journalists. And the sorts of things that deliver value are all the things around blogs, around events, around getting out and presenting to clients, speaking at events, all of these sorts of things. And if you can, and indeed the more of that you do, the more press coverage you will be able to generate as well. So we'll be coming on to questions in just a moment. Please fire them through. Ahead of this, can I just let you know a little bit about how we help businesses? Well, we certainly do full start to finish support with thought leadership initiatives, but there's particular areas we help businesses right from the start build in success. One is through facilitating launch and creativity meetings. One element will be to make sure that you, as I mentioned earlier, have really strong, interesting, creative hypotheses built in from the start. If you build those in from the start, then your research is going to have some interesting things. If you ask a load of worthy sounding questions and then look for answers at the end of it, quite frankly, you may well be disappointed. So we help avoid people do expensive research that falls flat. We help with maximising sales and impact through facilitating creative planning sessions, so that right from the very start you have a plan of what's going to happen, you're clear who's going to be doing what. This might be used to get a budget, or it might be used after the budget to make sure it's spent effectively. And we also have a service called Thought Leadership Rescue, which is all about if you've your thought leadership, you've done it, and indeed you didn't follow my advice earlier on, and it's all a bit weak or so-so, or you're not getting the impact you were hoping from it. We breathe life into it and get it back on track. Can I also flag up, we've got a number of webinars coming up. We've got one next week on making Google Ads work. We've got a pay-per-click Google Ads expert, Dominic Renshaw, presenting on that. And my observation is a lot of firms in the professions and consultancy don't use Google Ads, and quite frankly should be doing it. Maybe it's because they've had their fingers burnt in the past, maybe because they're just not sure how to go about it, and it can be a complicated area. We'll be talking you through that. We'll also got various webinars coming up on successful blogging in October and November, and we've also got various recorded webinars that we've done recently, such things as thought leadership on a budget and getting your B2B firm in the national media. Okay, questions? Okay, our first question is, should we work with the trade media? Well, this is a very important question, because what we've noticed in recent years, so doing research is a really good way of generating press coverage. We use it all the time. However, what it's notable is that because a lot of the media has basically destroyed their business model through giving it away free online, and also through the disappearance of print advertising for jobs, they've changed their business model. And typically the leading publication or two in most trade sectors has effectively transmogrified from a publication that sold generated most income from advertising and might have had a few bolt-ons like awards, or you could have an insert or sponsor their conference or things like this, to the fact is a lot of these organisations now see their subscriber database as their key asset, and they look to leverage this a number of ways. And one of the ways is through they want you to pay for them to produce research, and they're very reluctant to include the research that they haven't been paid for in their publication. So first of all, what does that mean? Well, I think it means, first of all, going back to what I mentioned earlier, if you're looking to get in particular trade sectors, you need to be taking PR advice early rather than at the end, because quite frankly, if you do a survey and want to get it in the lawyer and give it to a PR agency, they're going to struggle, because for lawyers, Lawyer Magazine's automatic response is, we don't carry research unless we conducted it. So this whole situation has changed a lot, but and how you engage with different trade publications isn't that straightforward anymore. That's why you need to think about it and indeed take experienced advice on it. But the short answer to your question is yes, research works really well with trade publications, and there's plenty of those that haven't that do carry external research. It works very well. It works very well in national media. It works very well with generating content for blogs, client meetings, presentations, all of that sort of thing. Right, we've just got time for one more question, which is, what sort of budget should you have? Well, clearly from the range of projects we've been talking about, it can vary depending on what you're going to do. If you're going to survey chief information officers at big companies and then do a conference about it, you're going to need a pretty big budget. But the sorts of things I was talking about earlier, you don't need any budget at all. Indeed, 2 of our 4 awards have been for limited budget campaigns, and indeed the one we mentioned for GlobalExpense was very cheap because we were using their own data. Really, it was simply a question of a bit of our time and printing the reports. We've come across people who've done fabulous achievements with next to no budget. One of the ones we'll send the link to, we got something like 400 bits of coverage with clients, and all they were doing was monitoring big retailer websites on Black Friday and seeing which ones were likely to come down through overload and which weren't. So you, by lateral thinking and creativity, and indeed taking PR advice from people like ourselves at an early stage, you can build these sorts of things in. Also, we use omnibus surveys, which are very cost effective with lots of our clients and generate big impact on £3,000 research budgets rather than £20,000 or £30,000 budgets if you're going to be surveying FTSE C-suite people. So small companies can get big impacts from small budgets, but the bigger you are, the more budget you're able to deploy, but you don't necessarily have to. But the bigger your budget, the more important it is to nail the ROI on it. Having said that, if you're a small firm with limited resources, you need to be focusing your thoughts on what activity is really going to deliver value for you. Okay. Thank you very much for joining me. I'm delighted to that you've been able to stay with us to the end. We'll be sending through the recording of this. Do feel free to send through further questions or give me a call. Unless you say otherwise, I will put further questions we get up on the blog, which will go with this webinar, and do hope that you'll be able to join us at a future one. Thank you very much for your time.